Welcome to the MHP Exchange Podcast, where industry veterans Frank Rizzo and Eric Busadil generously share their wealth of knowledge in their new podcast dedicated to the manufactured housing space. They tackle tough questions to provide valuable insights for those considering investments in mobile home parks. If you're seeking answers in the manufactured housing space, this podcast is your go-to resource.
And we're back on the Mobile Home Park Exchange Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Rizzo. Joining me, as always, my co-host, my partner, Eric Busadil. How are you doing this fine morning?
I'm doing good, Frank. How are you doing today?
We're very well.
Yeah.
We're very well. I'm very excited. We have a tremendous program for you today. We have a special guest. We have Nick Najjar from Elephant Capital, who's going to be joining us today. And for those of you out there listening, and I know you are, if you like this podcast, make sure you follow us on iTunes or Spotify, give us a rating, and tell us how we're doing. Or check us out on the MHPExchange.com, which is producing this program. And that is your one spot for opportunity, news, education, and entertainment in the mobile home park space. But joining us today, very special guest, Nick Najjar. How are you doing today, Nick?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
Very welcome.
Well, we appreciate you being on. And quite frankly, Nick is on because I heard him on a separate podcast with Andrew Keel, and I thought his story was very interesting, and I wanted to follow up on the conversation that he had prior to, because I thought it was some similarities between his journey and our journey, and some differences that I thought would be an interesting dynamic to understand some of the differences, how Eric and I built our business and how Nick's gone about building his. But briefly, Nick, if you just want to give everybody a brief introduction of who you are, so this way people have a little bit of your background.
Yeah. Nick Najjar. I got started in the mobile home park business, I guess, about 7 years ago, bought my first little 40-site community up in the south side of Chicago. And, ran that business for a year or two and decided, you know what, I do want to keep doing this. I had a couple friends that were doing really well at the time. Got in the business when it was probably a little bit easier to find deals than it is today. Since then bought a handful of communities. I sold a couple, partnered on a handful, but I actively manage 7 communities, a little over 300 lots at the moment, Missouri and Illinois.
It's interesting because, we always talk about it. We bought our first park in 2013, and then like post 2020, just a whole new set of people that have come in the space, and it has become more difficult finding deals since then because of all the new capital that's come into the MHP space. But one thing that you had mentioned previously is that you really got started wholesaling a lot of these deals, right? Is that your entry place into the mobile home park space?
Yeah. So timeline. So I had bought my first community, and then I can't remember, about probably a year after that. I wasn't really sure, right? Like I had a plan. We moved in some homes. We dealt with all the issues typically that you would deal with, and taking over a community that was a mom and pop community previously. I want to say all the issues, a lot of them. And then I decided, hey, I want to buy more. So I just got on the horn, started cold calling, started talking and networking with brokers. I found a deal up about 30 minutes from that community up in Northwest Indiana, and put it under contract. Something like, 1.2 million contract price, big community. I knew there was issues on the front end, but I didn't really know until I went on site. So we're under contract, drive the community. There's 16 people outside on a Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., about 22 pit bulls, a lot of vacant homes, rough infrastructure, rough property. And I quickly realized, this community's not for me. But we were under contract, and we negotiated a good terms, I thought, with the buyer. And I then had been listening to Frank Rolfe and his material for a while, and had heard of wholesaling Jimmy Johnson, who to this day is a good friend of mine, and just reached out to the Mobile Home University Investors Club that I was in. So they've got, which a lot of people are familiar with, like the Mobile Home Park Boot Camp, which I highly recommend to anybody that's not attended that. But then they have this Investors Club. It's a little bit, higher level education, more for operators, not people that are looking to buy their first park, just like, or have a park or a couple or want to invest in parks. So anyway, I just posted like, hey, I've got this deal, looking to sign the deal. And I ended up finding a buyer, and the fee was $50,000. So we assigned the contract, $50,000 fee, and then we peel back the layers. That I hadn't filed his tax returns in 3 years, all kinds of issues, and like I kind of wrote it off. I mean, like 14 months later, Paul, the buyer, had literally texted me. He's like, "Hey, what's your address? I'm going to send you a check. We're closing." I was like, literally a surprise. And I remember talking to Andrew Keel on the last podcast. It's like, I think in general, even as buyers, like we know we're going to buy community, there's so much stuff that can happen. But on the deal assignment side of things, it's a 50-50 shot all the way up to closing. We had a deal back in February where, we're checking all the boxes. Septic inspection was like the last box to check. All of them are failing. So like deal didn't close. And, it's a very challenging business, like a lot of brokers, and owner operators deal with, because there's just always, hundreds of issues, whether it's title issues, infrastructure issues, seller giving misleading information, debt, getting financing, all that stuff to be able to buy them. But anyway, a little long-winded answer was, it was interesting, right? So I mean, 50 grand. It literally is like easy. I drove the community, 4 phone calls, made 50 grand. Like I calculate my hourly rate. I'm like, this is awesome. Let's do more of this. And we did, but obviously not all deals are that easy. I mean, we've had deals we've spent easily 200 hours on and never make a dime, right? So it all balances out when it's all said and done. And, I think even now it's been a little more challenging, just because sellers' expectations haven't really adjusted to where the market's at from a interest rate, debt environment. So, yeah.
Do you find that, like, when you're looking to wholesale a deal, obviously you're not going through the broker channel, you have to source the deal yourself, and then your buyer has to really agree with your underwriting and not want to retrade or not have a different valuation metric from you. Otherwise, your fee could be in jeopardy, right? Do you find that as a challenge in the wholesale space?
Yeah. I mean, ideal world for any community, I think for everybody in the industry, would be to never have any retrade of the price. But again, I think sometimes things come up, and you just deal with it. And, I think the biggest thing when that happens is just being 100% transparent with the seller and like, hey, here's what we thought we were buying, and here's what we are actually buying. And most of the time, the seller doesn't even know that the issues exist or arise, right? So, I don't know if you had a specific question on that, but yeah, 100%. It's, pricing is everything, right? And even, for brokers, getting that listing price right is important. And, making sure that the person that is buying the community is going to fulfill their end of the deal, because that's a bad look on us if for some reason they don't perform.
Well, I think also a point that you made is not every deal is for everybody, right? We look at certain deals and we walk away, and then we see another group buy that deal, right? That happens all the time. I'm sure, like Frank said, you're entering into a deal, looking at it, the numbers may make sense, you're buying it right, but for whatever reason, it's just not for you, right? Whether it's pit bulls, trouble, where the next guy is willing to take that on, that's a key point, I feel like, in this space.
Yeah, and I'll also add to that, I think there's a ton of value in a negotiated agreement with the seller, right? Like, how many times have you guys been, verbal offer accepted, right? And then you get to the purchase agreement, and then they have an attorney look at it, and we've had attorneys be deal killers. We've had sellers, we had a situation where we, thought it was seller finance, and then the guy's attorney had called me, and he was like, "Hey, just so you know, like, the material terms of this purchase agreement are different than what seller had told us. Like you guys are, this is a seller finance agreement. And basically what it came down to is that the seller wanted to do a contract for deed agreement. I'm like, we do that for mobile homes, personal property all the time, but we can't not have the title transfer to our name day of closing, and have the seller be the bank. It's just, there's too much risk involved. So little stuff like that comes up even before the contract, before you're under contract, right? So having that pre-negotiated contract, like I've done before, I paid fees for, I love it. And we're actually doing more of that now moving forward than doing a lot of the deal assignments, again, because of the amount of time that it actually takes to close some of these deals.
Yeah, it was interesting because I know my journey into real estate investing, my first deals were assignments of contracts. And where my pivot point on that was, we had a deal in Staten Island. It was a piece of property which it was commercially zoned, but there was a home on it. And I knew the builder who had purchased the property next door was going to do a 6-family apartment building. And with this lot he could do another 8 units. It could turn into 14-unit apartment building. So I secured the contract, went to the builder, was going to sign the contract over to them. But typical, right? I was young at the time, and I didn't have the ability to close, right? So this is, and the builder knew it. So by the time we got to the closing table, little items that shouldn't have been items, like a fence that was 6 inches too much, I need the fence down because it's an issue. I mean, you're knocking the building down, right? So all in all, I ended up getting squeezed out of like $5,000 on a very thin margin deal. It was that I was making that much money. So instead of spending money, I said, I'll take down the fence myself. I'll do everything myself. So I go in the back. This bungalow has not been touched in years. I take down the fence. I end up with poison ivy all up my legs, right? I walked out of there. I said, I will never go into a deal again, not having you. I might assign it, but I will have the ability to close because I'm not going to put myself in the position to end up with poison ivy all up my legs. I mean, it was a very painful and costly learning experience. But another point that I thought was interesting that you had mentioned, and I know you said you own and operate these communities, but you also mentioned that you use a property manager. Like you've taken the approach of being an asset manager and not being necessarily the property manager. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And one quick point to what you just mentioned, if there's folks that are listening that are not, they don't own a park yet, you're looking for a first mobile home park, don't ever let if you need $500,000 or $100,000 to get a deal done, don't ever let that stop you from putting that deal under contract and really working to get a deal done. Because there's guys like me and you guys that are out there that will be happy to either partner with a newer operator or fund sometimes, just as a passive investor and, provide some mentorship. So just something that I kind of wish I would have started earlier because I had that limiting belief of, well, I don't have enough cash to do the deal, but that's just a limiting belief in my opinion. So,
and just to piggyback that, and you're right, it wasn't that you had the capital, but have access to the capital, right? So that wouldn't happen again. So know that, hey, I already have that network behind me, and if I'm going to go get that deal in contract, I'm going to be able to close it because I already have people who are willing to partner. And if Eric's not willing to partner, this person's willing to partner, and I can secure what I need to do, right? That puts you in a stronger position rather than, not having that network behind you to start with.
Exactly. And even the most experienced operators typically are always running both angles, right? You're always looking for more investors and you're always looking for more deals and opportunities.
Correct.
So yeah, so my story I kind of shared. So, once we got to 4 communities, it became a little more challenging. So I own 5 Real Producers Magazine franchises. And every time we add another publication, there's another whole level of complexity that's involved on the backside in operations, right? So every single mobile home park that we buy, if you have one or two, maybe even three communities, you typically can just manage the on-site managers as greeters and do most of the accounting and bookkeeping, yourself. And it's an easier thing, for us. Once we got to, like I said, I think the number was four, like, it's like, okay, we really got to do something here. We had 5 or 6 communities, and, I, I was learning the hard way that the mobile home park business is a little more operationally intense than I had anticipated, right? I had, like most people have heard, like, oh, Frank Rolfe, 5 hours a week per community. And, that may be true, but, being a experienced business owner, I will tell you that the challenges that we face, the issues that we have on a community level basis every single day. It's insane. Like that, it never ends. Like I don't know of anyone that has a community that's like we have no issues. Like there's always issues, right? So you really need talented people that can deal with the issues, problem solvers, critical thinkers that can really do things. Otherwise, you're doing all the critical thinking and the problem solving and dealing with the issues. So like I said, we had basically 2 full-time people and a bookkeeper part-time. And I lost one of those full-time people. And about that time, I was just kind of reevaluating where I'm at. I've got, business here, looking to be moved more into that investor bucket and the, Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrants, right? Like really being an investor and started making a couple private investments outside of mobile home parks. And like I just felt the need to have my mobile home park business be a little more passive. So I saw an ad in the MH Insider magazine, and I had heard of third party management. Had a couple calls with M. Shapiro, who's a very reputable, well known third party property management company, and then Blank Family Communities. Stephen Blank and I just had a couple of calls. I kind of shared where I was at, and he's basically said, "Hey, we can help you." And it's been a really good thing for me. And I will say third party management is definitely not for everybody. The same reason owning and operating mobile home parks isn't for everybody, or running a business isn't for everybody. It's just everybody has their own goals and unique abilities. And, I really want to keep playing to my unique abilities. And I'm not really a big fan of getting in the weeds and managing the day-to-day type of stuff. But I would say my strength is doing deals and looking at things from an asset level and really looking at certain reports and rent manager, vacancy reports, rent rolls, occupancy, profit and loss statements, and just identifying where those levers are that we need to pull, and then empowering and coaching the team, and a lot of times stepping in and helping, because there's stuff that I know that our team still doesn't know, even though they've been managing the communities for 16 months or so. So so that's kind of where it's been, and it's been a good thing for me. So I don't know if that answers your question. Kind of a long-winded rant there, I feel like, but
So, I mean, we buy, deep value add communities, like those properties that you see the pit bulls and the trouble in the morning. Like we've bought a handful of those, and we've tried third party management in the very beginning. How do you? Well, first, I mean, what kind of properties do you buy? And where we see that challenge in having a property manager manage a property for us is, it's not just typically managing the property, right? You got construction projects, you got infill projects, you have cleanup projects before the property becomes your, traditional or semi-traditional real estate asset where it's managing the evictions, the collections, the trash removal, your typical stuff. How do you handle, again, like what kind of properties do you typically buy, and does that model only work on a certain type of property?
it's a good question. I think it depends on the property manager, and the team that is in place. And I would even say within a property management company, for me, my regional, she's a rock star, right? So that one point person that is really managing the managers in the day to day and talking to the concrete vendors and doing all that stuff on the infill side, because we just ordered 3 homes literally yesterday. That stuff is, you got to have somebody that knows what the heck they're doing, has done it before, and it just depends on the manager. And I, like I said, I've been, shout out to Stephen Blank and his team. Him and his brother do an incredible job. And it's been a good thing. But I would say that Stephen's probably a little more selective in those types of projects that he would take on. It's probably a case by case, and even sometimes a location by location standpoint, right? If we had a heavy infill turnaround type of project, value add in a state that they don't have any regional in, like, he might say, nah, this isn't, he'd probably do it for me, right? Because we already have a great relationship and it could be a fit, but it might not be for everybody. So it's just, I almost think you have to look at each project on a case by case level, each person's, the property manager goal, whether it be a Shapiro or Blank or whoever that property manager is, and then the owner operator goal, and even also the investor goal, right? Because it costs more money sometimes to, manage these communities, depending on a certain situation, right? So, for me personally, I don't know how to say this, but if something's going to cost $15,000 and be a little bit more challenging for my team or for me personally, or $20,000, like, and it's just going to be like the easy button, like ordering a new home versus buying a used home and doing that process, like, we're typically just going to try and hit the easy button as best we can, just because I want to have my team focus on the really important stuff, which is increasing the bottom line and top line. So,
Got it.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Nick, what makes a good deal for you? Like, when you're looking at a deal, what do you look for? What are your metrics? Where do you find yourself? Is it strictly you're looking at the lot rent? There's so many different ways that you could, and Eric alluded to before, everybody looks at it a little differently. What's your buy box? Where do you find comfort? Where do you find opportunity?
Yeah, it's a really good question. A question I ask myself nearly every week when we don't always hit our acquisition goals that we have set. But ideally, it's going to be cash flow day one with upside. So we want to be able to ideally, pay out, 8 to 10% to our investors within the first 12 months. So we need enough cash flow after debt service to cover that. But then have enough upside to make it worth the proverbial, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Like, we're typically not going to buy a community for $2 million with the goal of selling it for $2.5 million, 5 to 7 years from now. Like, we need to, for me at this point, it's really more about the key metrics of a 20% plus internal rate of return, the ability to pay out a preferred rate of return, and then multiple and invested capital in the three times or higher. Now, that with that being said, we would not shy away from a deal that had no cash flow, but we could double our equity within, say, 2 to 3 years. Looking at a big infill project in the right area or that type of thing. So I'm getting a lot more selective than I used to be in terms of location, and park-owned homes, age of homes in the community. Even if there aren't any park-owned homes, if the most of the community is 70s and 80s homes, we're probably going to pass an opportunity, just because I'm just so sick of dealing with, do we rehab this home? Do we tear it out? Then we try and rehab it, and it takes us 3 contractors to get somebody to actually finish the job they set out for, and all that. Like, just really trying to hit the easy button on a lot of certain key things with the business, rather just bring in 10, 15 brand new homes, sell those homes. But again, the community has to be in the right location to be able to sell those homes. And that's a very, challenging thing.
I think we've seen that too. You have to know the markets, because we've seen operators in certain markets bring in new homes, but it wasn't necessarily a new home market. And I always think that you have to know the difference in pricing, where someone's going to buy this home, what's there going to be total, all-in cost of home, lot rent included, any utility fees, versus comparable rents in that market. And if there's not a spread, a differential, then, or if you're going to be top ticking in the market, it's probably not a new home market to be in unless your community is going to be 5-star, right? And I think that's where you have to balance a lot of different variables in this space, which you don't typically have to do if you're, investing in industrial or investing in multifamily.
Well, and going into a new market, right, is always a challenge. I mean, if you're close to that market and you know the market and you got a team in place, I mean, very important when you're going to do an infill project. Do you stay within like a certain parameter of buying, Nick? Like, do you, I know you said you're in Indiana also, right? Is there certain places you will or won't go?
Yeah, so we're basically focused. Previously was pretty strictly Missouri, Illinois, Indiana. We might have stretched into Iowa, somewhere that it'd be easy to drive to or get a direct flight to for me personally. But now that we have a really good gelled relationship with the blank team, we'll kind of go in the Midwest or Southeast. So those 10, 12 states. Again, it's more for the individual market and being able to lease up new homes or sell new homes quickly, efficiently. That's more important to me. And the only other home thing is if you're not sure about the market, just be prepared to do rentals or to eat a $10,000-$20,000 cost. Say your all-in cost on a brand new home $60,000. Well, maybe you have to bake in $10,000 a home because you'll have to sell those things for $50,000 to get an spot. So anyway, long-winded answer again, but Midwest and Southeast is kind of our focus right now.
So Nick, I mean, you've been in it for 7 years, 8 years now, which puts you in like we talked before, like there's people that came in post-COVID and the pre-COVID people have been along. Is there a deal that stands out to you that you're like, wow, this was the inflection point where I realized I'm in the right space, I love what I'm doing, and I'm deep dive. Like what was that deal that just said, this is where I need to focus my attention on?
That's a great question. Yeah, a park in the St. Louis area traded for $35 million at 3.5 cap or something like that a few years ago. And in that same market, a good friend of mine, I'll just kind of tell the whole story because it's kind of emphasize a couple points. So called an owner, been in touch with him probably 4 or 5 times. Called him in November, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not ready to sell." In February, a good friend of mine, I'm not going to name him, I don't think you care, but he closed the deal. I saw him post on Facebook or something like, bought this deal, got great terms, seller carry, all this stuff, and it was a good, clean deal in a good market. Couple of minor issues, but like a good deal. He got a good deal. Like say bought something in the St. Louis market at maybe an 8 cap, right? And and I called him like, what the heck, man? Like I talked to that guy in November and he said he wasn't ready to sell. And it was just timing is everything, right? So the one moral of the story is follow up. One guy that might want to sell today, not want to sell today, would be willing to sell tomorrow. I always joke, especially in the winter, like these owners are one water line break away, one, terrible tenant issue away, one last call from the police department or the city zoning, official like they're just literally one situation away. Or unfortunately, life happens, right? Death, divorce, liquidity issues, all that stuff. So just having to consistently be in touch with folks. But anyway, that deal. So he held it, did his thing for like a year and a day, right? Or something less than 2 years, sold it, made, I don't know, $500,000, $1 million on the deal. And like it, I saw the full cycle thing. So that's just kind of one. And that those 2 communities are actually in the exact same market in St. Louis that kind of hit home. And a good friend of mine, Steve Edel, Due Diligence Partners, shout out to them and anybody that's looking for good due diligence on their communities. But I remember he sourced a lot of deals with Dave Reynolds, and he's like, Nick, every deal, even the deals that they passed on, the guys ended up making money on the deal. So it's like, you really, as long as you buy right, you do good due diligence, like it's really hard to lose money. Until all the meat is chewed off the bone and is sold to the institutional guys, the Blackstones of the world, and the big operators that are buying them. There's always money to be made, even from the very beginning. So, and then the other thing for me is just looking at every year the rent raises that go into place, and that immediate asset appreciation that you get, and just all the things that I like about mobile home parks as an asset class, not just an individual deal level, is really important to me.
So, I don't think people realize how much planning goes into before you buy that park, because you always make your money on the buy. Like, we just yesterday, we're in diligence on a deal right now, and we're spending 3 hours just going through the underwriting and the business plan, not including the diligence on the ground, where we're down on the ground inspecting the homes, inspecting the infrastructure, but just the planning and making sure that your costs are right when you're planning out your capital improvements, creating a timeline of expectations so your budgeting is correct, so you can generate those returns, create value for the residents, make sure that the residents are seeing the positive impact of your ownership, and they're buying into that process, and then also generating returns for your stakeholders, which allows you to do it again, right? Because you have to have that delicate, as an operator, that balancing act of business plan performance, resident buy-in to the process, and stakeholder satisfaction, right? So all of it's got to flow together for you to continue on doing what you do. And obviously, it's been working well for you, Nick, because you've been doing it for almost a decade now, right? Not to date you, but you've been doing it for quite a while. But any parting advice that you might have to anybody listening out there, or any parting thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, I'd say really get clear on what your goals are. You asked a lot of great questions, like what's your buy box, right? Like, where are you going to get the capital if you don't have the capital? Don't just buy a community because you think that's a good idea, right? Like, really get clear on, like, hey, this is an asset class that I want to be in, and go through the training, listen to all the podcasts. Like, one of the most beautiful things about this world today is the amount of free information that's available. So just do all the work and be willing to put in the work. You mentioned on the front level, I'm thinking about the amount of time that I spend. I've been a little more looking at a little more broker opportunities, right? Like actual listed communities, deals that we get from the brokers, and I'll spend a good 3 to 7 hours, and I have an underwriting team that does a lot of the about 4 to 6 hours is how long it takes them to underwrite. So we're all in probably about 10-20 hours just before we even put in a firm offer to a broker, right? So like, that's step one. Like, am I going to spend time on this deal? Do I like it? Asking all the questions, the location, all the things. Just be willing to put in the work. Be willing to embrace the suck. As a mentor of mine, reminded me on Tuesday, like, there's a lot of suck in any business. You just have to be willing to embrace it, and really have to have thick skin. Like, one of the mantras of Elephant Capital is like, we have thick skin like elephants, because you have this business will crush you if you don't have thick skin, and it'll crush you quick. And we're starting to see it now, and just know that there's going to be plenty more opportunities in the next year or two. You kind of mentioned on it earlier, so don't be afraid to pass on those opportunities today. And don't be afraid to ask questions of experienced operators, and get folks involved and make sure you're making the right decision. And one of the biggest things I pay attention to is, like, our investors, now that we've started to raise more outside capital, like, there's a serious fiduciary responsibility that I have, that I don't take lightly. And I've seen a lot of folks that have bought, like you mentioned, the pre-COVID time in our business, and the post-COVID amount of institutional money, but also just the amount of just syndicators that come on, money raisers. Like, you got to be willing to operate. You got to be willing to get your hands dirty. But anyway, those money raisers, those are the ones that, may be hurting here in the next 2 to 3 years, even sooner. We've already started seeing it in a couple communities, like they're just underwrote the deals wrong, not able to meet debt service coverage requirements, and they're forced to sell, sometimes at a loss because there's opportunities there. So just know the opportunities are there. Educate yourself. Listen to a lot of podcasts. Go to the Mobile Home Park University boot camp. Do all the things to be confident as an investor and as an owner operator, and just know that the next deal is the next phone call away, or the next 100 phone calls. That's about how many it takes to just get an owner on the line.
There you go. E, did you pick anything up today? What did you learn?
Always good information. The whole management, how he handles his business and looks at it as an asset manager. Seems to me he's looking to be really a passive income investor, right? That's, I think, your ultimate goal, right? And it can be done. You can do it with third-party management. If you find the right team, right, and obviously develop a good relationship with them, they get to know you. That's important information, especially for someone new looking to go into the space. It can be done with third-party management, which we found it very difficult, but it could be done.
So, and I would tell anybody out there, two things that really stuck out to me: focus on the important stuff and the follow-up, because so much of this business is won and lost on follow-up from there. So listen, Nick, I appreciate you being down here. I appreciate you participating with it. This was a great episode. If anybody out there is listening, if you're wondering if investing in the mobile home park space is the right thing for you, give us a call at the MHP Exchange. You can reach us at 718-447-8100. We'd love to hear from you, answer any questions that you might have on that. If you want to reach out to Nick, how would anybody reach you if they had any questions and they wanted to follow up with you?
Yeah, that's just through our website, elephantcp.com. So elephantcp, short for capitalpartners.com.
Perfect. And if you want to have a consultation with Eric to see how he goes about operating the park, or give us a call at the MHP Exchange as well. You can check us out at the MHPExchange.com. And if you like this episode, rate us on Spotify or on iTunes, wherever you may listen, and check us out at the MHPExchange.com. Appreciate your time. Until next time, this is Frank Rizzo.
Nice having you, Nick.
Thank you.